I did my photographer on Astrid, and she is known to be German and born in 1938, and she is still alive today. And this is a self-portrait of her in 1960 of her front cover of her book, of her taking a picture of a monochrome camera in black and white from her book Astrid's Retrospect. A quote by her is, "I'm not a businesswoman, I'm not organized, I've never been commercial, I never looked after my negatives, and you need to prove that you took the photos. There have been 200 books on the Beatles, and almost all have used my photographs. It wasn't just with the Beatles. If other friends wanted, say, a passport photo, I'd shoot one off and give it to them, often with the negatives." And this was written by her describing her lifestyle in photography. Her biographical information is she was born in 1938 and worked as an assistant for photographic tutor Reinhard Wolf in Hamburg magazine. She also trained as a photographer for him until she became a freelance photographer and learned photography to make her own fashion photography, but later on become a rock band photographer, and still alive today at 78 years old. Her career was with being a photographer with Reinhard as the assistant of Reinhard Wolf in 1959 to 1963, and became a freelance photographer in Hamburg, Germany, and worked later on still as a freelance photographer, and also recorded the Beatles' lifestyle and became the fiancée of former Beatle member Stuart Sutcliffe, who passed away in 1962, and published information and photos throughout Hamburg. Accepted a job with German magazine to get photos for the Beatles' Hard Days and Night film while filming it there, and worked on various other rock bands coming into Hamburg, and known to be a couple decades after, published in 2008 a book of her photography called Astrid's Retrospective. Here is the first photograph of the Beatles ever taken in 1960 in Hamburg, Germany, known to be called the Beatles' Hugo Hasse Fanfare, showing of light to dark perspectives, and that she gives a lot of detail and contrast in the photo to focus more on them, and giving it a vantage point she uses a tripod camera, showing that she's standing only a few feet away from them, blurring the image in the background, but focusing only on the 5 Beatles themselves, and cropping the image to make it more in detail. Here is a portrait of John Lennon in 1962, and that it seems she gives a light to dark perspective of his face, showing a side lighting and showing it's cropped from the shoulders up only to focus more on the subject's face than in everything else in the background, giving it a more contrast and in depth of texture of seeing through his eyes, and framing it in a certain way to make it look like she is standing very close to him, but using the lens very close. Here's the Savage Young Beatles in 1960 in Hamburg, Germany. Known to notice that the guitars seem to be in more detail than the Beatles themselves, but as if though she gives still the light to dark perspective and giving a lot of depth and color and tones, making it very timid and dark in certain areas, but very bright and light in other areas, framing it to be only in the certain middle part of the image of them, but giving it more in detail. Here's a photograph of Paul McCartney in 1960 in Hamburg, Germany, and giving a blur effect background in the image of the other band member, Stuart Sutcliffe. She wants to focus more on Paul and cropping the image to only his waist up, making it focus more on him than on the background itself, making it as a frozen image but blurred in the background. Here's a photograph of John and George on an attic in Hamburg, Germany in 1967 after Stuart Sutcliffe had passed away, giving it the light to dark perspective and the side lighting, and a vantage point seeming to be only a few feet away, and zooming in the lens to crop the image to give it more detail and texture to show off their leather jackets in detail, and their texture of their faces, showing more of their facial features in certain areas. Here's the Fab Four outside Hamburg, Germany, in Hard Days and Night filming in 1964, when Stuart Sutcliffe passed away and Ringo Starr became one of the band members, knowing to be that it seems she blurred the image for a reason to focus more on the Fab Four of the Beatles, but then to give it a front lighting to make it seem as if they're looking into the sunlight to focus on certain objects, but then framing the image very weirdly off focused on a certain vantage point side view, giving it that she wants to make it go out of focus for a reason to make it more focused on the Beatles. Here is another photo of the Beatles on set in 1964 in Hamburg, Germany for Hard Days and Night film, showing the out-of-focus detail and the blur effect in the background, giving it an odd way of looking at it in different directions, making you want to look at this in many different perspectives. Not really cropping the image, but focusing on a certain angle on a side view of lighting coming all over the place in the background. Here is a self-portrait of Astrid and Stuart Sutcliffe in 1960 as the couple of being fiancés at the time, fiancé and fiancée, noting to focus on the side lighting again, and noticing that it's cropped from the chest up to make it context and to focusing more on them than on the object next to them, giving it a more light to dark tonal perspective, focusing more on them at a vantage point seeming to be as if it's in a mirror that they are taking a photograph in. Here are the fans outside the cavern at 1964 for the Hard Days and Night film, excited to see them, and cropped the side of the image to make you wonder how many people are really in this line, and that it gives you a frozen motion and time perspective of this person on the left-hand corner running to get into line, and people moving around, giving you a motion blur of what is to come, and giving it a detail and context of colors. Here's John Lennon in 1964 at his house in Hamburg, Germany, of playing guitar, and you could tell the guitar is very in depth of color and detail, but his focus is more on the guitar and himself than the background, which is very blurred, giving it a focal point to focus in the middle of the vantage point of where she's standing center in the middle of the room to give this picture, and cropping the image to focus more on certain aspects of him and the guitar he is holding to show more of the detail in the frets and strings. Here's another photo of John Lennon in Hamburg in 1962 of a self-portrait of noticing there will be a side lighting on the left-hand side of his face, giving it a dark to light perspective of detail and contrast and tonal colors, showing it very dark throughout the image but very light and in detail of his face, giving it a cropped frame to only focus on him than the things in the background. Here is the late Stuart Sutcliffe in a photo collage portraits of 1960-62 in Hamburg, Germany, showing the back lighting and giving it more context of light to dark colors and detail, really high contrast detail in his face, focusing on his straight look and focusing on him, and the blurred image down below doesn't want you to focus on that, it wants you to focus on his face. Here's another photo of Stuart Sutcliffe art studio loft as Astrid home in Hamburg, Germany, and of a silver print photo of him out of focus to give you more of a perspective of, it's a fuzzy feeling, but it gives you an image of why it's taking at a weird side angle, and that there's a lot of lighting, front lighting and back lighting, wondering what is going on in this image. Here's another photo of Stuart Sutcliffe in Hamburg, Germany from 1960 to 62 of random objects placed around, giving you lots of tonal ranges of colors and depth from light to dark and from very high contrast to low contrast, and very bright colors on him and darker colors in the background. And it's noticing Astrid is taking this photograph and noticing she's in the mirror itself, giving you a vantage point of kind of high up tripod, but then also she is in front of him. Just the tripod gives it a higher vantage point angle to make it look more, and doesn't really crop the image at all. Here's a photo of Stuart Sutcliffe and Tony Sheridan in 1962 in a color photo that seems to be kind of also a little black and white in the background, but it's still more colored, focused on the two gentlemen, noticing that the colors are very bright and high contrasted, and it doesn't give you a full detail color, but it still focuses on the aspects of the guitar and the balloons and the two gentlemen in the photo. Here is the last photo taken of Paul, George, Pete, John, and Stuart before in 1962 later on when Stuart had passed away. But this is a fuzzy picture, but it's one of the first other pictures she had taken of them when they had first become the Beatles, and giving you a high contrast in some parts and a light to dark, but a fuzzy feeling to make you wonder where this is at exactly and how she took the photo. Significance is that she's a freelance photographer, not a pictorialist, not really modernist. She was a social documentary and a monochrome commercial documentary for the Beatles, and she has monochrome printing process. She gives truth, falling in love for the Beatle member, getting close to them, and huge